The morning light filters through lace curtains that have hung in the same spot for 35 years. It catches the dust motes dancing above the polished oak table, a family heirloom that's witnessed 1,000 gatherings. George Brennan, 73, sits at his usual place, weathered hands wrapped around a steaming coffee mug. His eyes drift to the two empty chairs across from him, where two untouched mugs of coffee have grown cold. 7:35 becomes 8 o'clock. 8 becomes 8:30. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Sylvia's parents, chimes 9 times. George stands, takes the untouched mugs to the sink, and pours the cold coffee down the drain. The sound of running water masks the sigh that escapes his lips. "They must have gotten busy," Sylvia says from the doorway, her voice carrying that familiar forced cheerfulness. At 71, her frame has grown smaller, but her eyes still hold that same patient warmth they've always had. "You know how the kids are these days." George nods, but doesn't turn around. "That's the 3rd time this month, Syl. I'm sure there's a good reason." She moves to the refrigerator, opens it to reveal an untouched breakfast casserole large enough to feed 6. "I'll just wrap this up for later." Outside their window, the small town of Mapleton continues its morning routine. Neighbors wave to each other as they retrieve newspapers. Children wait for school buses. Young families hurry to start their days. The Brennans' home, once the bustling center of family gatherings, emergency housing, and community support, stands oddly quiet in comparison. As George watches Sylvia carefully portioning the uneaten food into containers, his mind drifts back to a time when every chair at this table had been filled, when the sound of laughter and overlapping conversations had been the soundtrack of their lives. 25 years earlier, the Brennan kitchen had never known silence. Their oldest son, Michael, had just moved back home with his pregnant wife, Alison, after losing his job. Their younger son, David, was still living at home while finishing college. Their daughter, Rachel, would stop by almost daily with her toddler, seeking advice or just a break. "Dad, I swear, this time the business plan is solid," Michael said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "We're talking guaranteed returns in 6 months." George, in his late 40s, then with only hints of grey at his temples, studied the numbers with the careful eye of a man who'd worked his way up from factory floor supervisor to plant manager through 30 years of discipline. "40,000 is a lot of money, Mike," he said carefully. "That's a big chunk of our retirement savings." "It's an investment, Dad. You'll get it back and more." Michael's enthusiasm was contagious. His smile the same one he'd used to charm his way out of trouble since childhood. "Plus, I'll finally be able to give Alison and the baby the life they deserve." Sylvia placed a hand on George's shoulder, her eyes encouraging. "We've always said family comes first, haven't we?" George nodded slowly, remembering his own father's refusal when he'd asked for help starting a small business in his 20s. The disappointment had shaped him, made him vow to never let his own children feel that sting of parental rejection. "All right," he agreed, watching Michael's face light up. "But we draw up proper papers. This is a loan, not a gift." "Absolutely, Dad. You're literally saving our future. You won't regret this." Later that night, as George added up the figures in their financial planner, Sylvia wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. "You're the safety net our family needs." "I know," George replied, though a small voice in the back of his mind warned him to be more cautious. He silenced it quickly. After all, what were parents for, if not to help their children succeed? 6 months later, Michael's business had failed spectacularly. The loan paperwork remained in a folder, unsigned. Michael had always been too busy to finalize it. When George brought it up, the conversation quickly turned. "I can't believe you're worried about money at a time like this," Michael said, his voice tight with accusation. "Alison is 8 months pregnant, Dad. We're about to lose our apartment. And so, Michael, Allison, and eventually baby Emma moved into the Brennan home. Temporarily, they said. Just until they got back on their feet. Temporary turned into 2 years, then 3. The loan was never mentioned again. George and Sylvia converted their home office into a nursery. Their retirement savings, once robust, began its slow decline. "Grandpa, watch me," 7-year-old Emma called from the backyard swing set George had built himself. "I see you, princess," George called back, smiling despite the cramps in his back from a long day's work. At 55, he had hoped to be considering early retirement. Instead, he had taken on extra shifts to help cover the costs of raising a grandchild and supporting his son's family. Inside, Sylvia was helping their daughter Rachel with her own crisis. Her husband, Jake, had left her for another woman, and she sat sobbing at the kitchen table, 3-year-old Lily playing with blocks at her feet. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Rachel cried. "The apartment is in his name. He's saying I need to be out by the end of the month." "You'll stay here," Sylvia said without hesitation. "The sewing room can be converted for Lily. You can have the guest room." "But what about your quilting circle, your space?" Sylvia patted Rachel's hand. "Family comes first. Always has, always will." That night, as George and Sylvia prepared for bed, he voiced his concerns. "Syl, I don't know if we can handle 2 more people in the house. We're already stretching every dollar with Michael's family here." "There are children, George. What kind of parents would we be if we turned them away?" Her eyes held that same unwavering belief in family above all else. "My parents helped us when we were starting out, remember? This is what families do." George remembered all too well. Sylvia's parents had given them the down payment for their first home. A gift, not a loan. He had worked tirelessly to pay them back anyway, wanting to stand on his own 2 feet. His children, it seemed, didn't share that particular value. "I'll talk to Michael about contributing more," George promised, knowing even as he said it that the conversation would go nowhere. It never did. The pattern continued. Their niece Diane arrived one winter night with bruises on her arms and fear in her eyes, fleeing an abusive marriage. Of course she stayed. Of course George and Sylvia helped her get back on her feet, watching her 2 children while she got her nursing degree. When their younger son, David's college roommate, needed emergency housing after a dormitory fire, the Brennans opened their home. When Michael needed bail money after a drunk driving arrest, George withdrew from his 401k, accepting the penalty without complaint. "You're saints," their friends would say. "We don't know how you do it all." George and Sylvia would smile modestly. "It's just what family does," they'd reply. But as the years passed and their 60s approached, the toll became harder to ignore. George postponed retirement twice. Sylvia's arthritis made her quilting increasingly difficult, but she still cooked for a houseful every night. Their savings dwindled. The dreams they'd once had, of traveling, of the lake cabin they'd always wanted, quietly faded away. And yet, there was joy. Thanksgiving dinners with all 3 generations around the table. Christmas mornings with grandchildren in pajamas. The satisfied exhaustion of having given everything to those they loved most. They never expected a return on their investment. Never kept score. Love wasn't transactional, it was unconditional. Until, gradually, it wasn't. The exodus began slowly, almost imperceptibly. First, Michael and Allison found a house across town when Emma was 10. "We need our own space," they explained, "but we'll be over all the time." All the time became weekends. Weekends became holidays. Holidays became occasional phone calls. Rachel moved to Chicago for a job opportunity when Lily was in middle school. "It's only a 3-hour drive," she promised. "We'll visit monthly." Monthly became seasonally. Seasons stretched into years. Each absence left a small crack in the foundation of the Brennans' world. Each unreturned call or missed birthday widened those cracks. Still, George and Sylvia rationalized, made excuses, kept their hurt private. "They're busy with their own lives," Sylvia would say. "That's good. That's what we raised them to do." George would nod, swallowing his disappointment. Of course. Of course. Now, at 73 and 71, they find themselves in a house too large, too quiet, too filled with memories of people who no longer visit. "I'm going to call Michael," George says suddenly, watching Sylvia label the containers of food with today's date. "See what happened this morning." Sylvia stops, container in midair. "Maybe give them space, George. You know how Michael gets when he feels pressured." The familiar caution, always walking on eggshells around their children's feelings while ignoring their own, ignites a rare spark of anger in George. "They said they would come. Emma was supposed to show us her college acceptance letters." His voice rises slightly. "The least they could do is call if they can't make it." Sylvia sighs, places the container in the refrigerator alongside a week's worth of similar containers. Food prepared with love, never eaten. "I'll call him later. He responds better to me." George bites back his reply, turns to leave the kitchen. His hip aches, the same one he injured helping Michael move furniture last year, a day when his son had been all smiles and promises about getting together more often. In the living room, photographic evidence of their generosity covers every surface. Pictures of children they raised, sometimes more than their own parents did. Graduation photos of nieces and nephews they helped put through school. Community awards for their volunteer work at the church food pantry. A life of giving. A house now empty of receivers. That afternoon, Sylvia calls Michael. The conversation is brief, filled with apologies and excuses about Emma's last-minute volleyball practice. "We'll definitely reschedule for next weekend," Michael promises. "Emma can't wait to show you her acceptance package from state." Sylvia hangs up, hope rekindled as it always is. "They're coming next weekend instead," she tells George, who sits in his recliner reading the paper. "Emma had volleyball." George lowers his paper, regards his wife with eyes that have grown less patient over the years. "She's had the acceptance letters for 3 weeks, Syl. 3 weeks they've been promising to come show us." Well, you know how busy teenagers are these days. Too busy for the grandparents who babysit her every weekend for 10 years? Too busy for the people who contributed to her college fund while postponing their own retirement? Sylvia's smile falters. "That's not fair, George. We never helped them for recognition or gratitude." "No, we didn't," he agrees, his voice softening as he sees the hurt in her eyes. "But common courtesy wouldn't be too much to ask." Later, after Sylvia has gone to bed, George sits at the kitchen table with their financial statements spread before him. The numbers tell a stark story. Their generosity has cost them dearly. The retirement that should have been comfortable is now precarious. The medical expenses that loom with aging will stretch their limited resources even further. He thinks of all the times he could have said no, should have said no. The boundaries never set, the expectations never managed, the entitlement he unwittingly cultivated in those he loved most. With a heavy sigh, he gathers the papers and turns out the light. Winter brings its own kind of isolation to the Brennan household. A heavy snowfall has blanketed Mapleton for 3 days. George's arthritic hands struggle with the snow shovel, but he refuses to ask Michael for help. Pride, perhaps, or the knowledge that asking would lead to promises unfulfilled. On the 4th morning, Sylvia slips on ice hidden beneath the fresh snow while retrieving the mail. The fall is bad. A broken wrist and bruised hip. The neighbor across the street sees it happen and rushes over, helps her inside, drives them to the emergency room. In the sterile white hospital room, George calls all three children, leaves messages, texts, updates. By evening, only their daughter Rachel has responded, a text message with a sad emoji and a promise to call tomorrow. The neighbor, Ellen Martinez, drives them home, helps George get Sylvia settled, brings them a casserole the next day. My mother lives alone in Arizona, she explains. I know how hard these things can be. For 2 weeks, it's Ellen who checks in daily. Ellen's teenage son who shovels their driveway without being asked. Ellen's husband who installs the grab bars in the bathroom that George has been meaning to put in for months. Not once do their children visit. Rachel calls twice, brief conversations filled with her own problems. David sends a get well card. Michael texts that they'll try to swing by when things settle down. The day Sylvia's cast comes off, she sits at the kitchen table, staring out at the winter landscape. Where did we go wrong, George? She asks quietly. Was it something we did? George takes her uninjured hand in his. I've been asking myself the same thing. That night, they receive a call from an unexpected source. Their niece Diane, now a successful nurse practitioner living in Minneapolis, has heard about Sylvia's fall from a Mapleton acquaintance on social media. I'm coming this weekend, she says firmly. No arguments. I owe you both so much, and it's time I started repaying that debt. You don't owe us anything, dear, Sylvia protests weakly, though her voice betrays her pleasure. I owe you everything, Diane corrects her. You saved my life. You saved my children's lives. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't try. Diane's visit brings light back into the Brennan home. She cooks, cleans, organizes Sylvia's medications, and talks openly about the contrast between her own gratitude and their children's apparent indifference. Have you considered talking to someone? She asks gently over tea. A counselor, maybe. The senior center has a good program. George begins to dismiss the suggestion. They're not therapy people. But Sylvia surprises him. I think that's a wonderful idea, she says. We could use an outside perspective. The therapist at the senior center, Dr. Harriet Baker, is kind but direct. In their third session, she introduces a concept that resonates deeply with their situation. What you're describing, she explains, is what I call giving without guarding boundaries. It's incredibly common among your generation, particularly those who grew up with certain values about family obligation. George leans forward, interested despite his initial skepticism about therapy. How do you mean? You gave without conditions, without expectation of return, and without limits, Dr. Baker elaborates. On the surface, that sounds noble, but without healthy boundaries, giving can create unhealthy dynamics. Recipients begin to expect rather than appreciate. The giving becomes invisible, just the status quo, and you, the givers, end up depleted, financially, emotionally, physically. Sylvia's eyes fill with tears. But they're our children. Isn't it our job to help them whenever they need it? Help, yes. Enable, no, Dr. Baker says gently. And there's a crucial difference between supporting someone through a crisis and becoming their permanent safety net. One empowers them to stand on their own. The other teaches them they don't have to. George thinks about the unsigned loan agreement still in his desk drawer. About Michael's business that failed because his son had no real skin in the game. About the pattern of rescues that had never taught his children resilience. So what do we do now? He asks. They're adults with their own families. The damage is done. It's never too late to establish healthy boundaries, Dr. Baker assures them. And more importantly, it's never too late to reclaim your own lives. The transformation begins slowly. George and Sylvia join a seniors group at the community centre. They make new friends, other empty nesters with similar experiences. They schedule activities for themselves, a painting class for Sylvia, a woodworking workshop for George. When Michael calls, asking for money to help with Emma's extra college expenses his scholarship doesn't cover, George takes a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Mike, but that won't be possible," he says, his voice kind but firm. "Our finances are tighter than you might think. We've helped as much as we can with Emma's education, but additional expenses will need to come from you and Allison." The silence on the other end speaks volumes. "But Dad, it's only $3,000. You guys always have a cushion." "Not anymore," George replies simply. "Years of helping family have depleted that cushion. We need what's left for our own medical expenses." The conversation ends with Michael's barely disguised anger. When George hangs up, he expects to feel guilty. Instead, he feels something unexpected: relief. "You did the right thing," Sylvia says, having overheard. There's a new resolve in her eyes. It's time they stand on their own feet. Spring arrives with its promise of renewal. The Brennans plant a vegetable garden for the first time in years, something they'd always been too busy doing for others to do for themselves. Their new friends from the senior center help with the heavier work, transforming it into a social event with laughter and shared meals. Diane visits regularly now, sometimes bringing her children, now young adults who genuinely seem to enjoy their great aunt and uncle's company. She notices the changes in them. "You seem lighter somehow," she comments one evening as they sit on the porch swing. "More at peace." "We're learning to put ourselves first sometimes," Sylvia explains. "It feels selfish occasionally, but Dr. Baker says it's necessary." "It's not selfish at all," Diane insists. "You can't pour from an empty cup. That's what you taught me when I was getting my nursing degree, remember? You need to take care of yourselves too." The wisdom of their own advice, reflected back to them after all these years, strikes them both as profoundly ironic. Summer brings an unexpected development. Their car, 12 years old and increasingly unreliable, finally breaks down completely. The repair cost is prohibitive. "We could ask the kids to chip in," Sylvia suggests half-heartedly, knowing even as she says it what the response would be. George shakes his head. "We'll figure it out ourselves." They research public transportation options. They consider their budget for a used vehicle. They adapt, problem solve, take control of their situation without automatically turning to family. One evening, there's a knock at their door. Their neighbor Ellen stands there with her husband Ted, holding a set of car keys. "My mother passed away last month," Ellen explains. "She left me her car. It's only got 30,000 miles on it, and we don't need a third vehicle. We'd like you to have it." George begins to protest, his pride still strong, but Sylvia places a hand on his arm. "We've spent our lives giving," she whispers. "Maybe it's time we learn to receive with grace." They accept the car, not as a loan, but as a gift from people who expect nothing in return. The generosity of relative strangers, where their own flesh and blood failed them, is a painful lesson, but also a healing one. When Thanksgiving approaches, the usual pattern would be for Sylvia to call each child, practically begging them to attend the family dinner, offering to accommodate any schedule, any dietary preference, any condition that might secure their presence. This year is different. They make plans with their new friends instead. A potluck at the community center for those without family nearby, or those, like them, creating a chosen family of people who value their presence. The invitations to their children are extended once, without pressure or expectation. "We'd love to see you, but we understand if you can't make it," George says in his calls, meaning it for perhaps the first time. To their surprise, all three children express shock at the change in plans. "But Thanksgiving is always at your house," Michael protests. It's tradition. Traditions can change, George replies calmly. And this year, we're trying something new. The day itself is different, but wonderful. The community center buzzes with conversation and laughter. The Brennans find themselves surrounded by people who actively choose to be with them, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. When they return home that evening, there are 3 messages on their answering machine. One from each child, each expressing varying degrees of confusion and hurt at having their expectations upended. George and Sylvia listen to the messages together, holding hands. It's strange, Sylvia muses. They sound like we felt all those times they didn't show up. They'll adjust, George says, just like we did. The real breakthrough comes the following spring, when George's 74th birthday arrives. They've planned a small celebration with their senior center friends. No family is expected. They've learned not to count on it. But on the day itself, as they're preparing to leave for the community center, there's a knock at the door. Michael stands there with Emma, now a sophomore in college. Behind them, Rachel has just pulled into the driveway with Lily. David calls to say he's running late but on his way. "Happy birthday, Dad," Michael says, looking somewhat abashed. "Can we come in?" The gathering is awkward at first. There are undercurrents of resentment, confusion, unspoken hurts on all sides. But there's something else too. A tentative reaching out, a recognition perhaps that what once was taken for granted might now be lost. Later, as the impromptu party winds down, Emma pulls her grandparents aside. "I've missed you guys," she says simply, "and I'm sorry I haven't been around more." "We've missed you too, sweetheart," Sylvia replies, embracing her granddaughter. "Mom and Dad told me about the car situation," Emma continues, "and about how you couldn't help with my extra college expenses. I never realized, I always thought that we were an endless resource," George suggests gently. "Many people made that assumption." Emma nods, looking genuinely contrite. "I'm working 2 campus jobs now. I'm figuring it out on my own, and weirdly it feels good, like I'm standing on my own feet." The pride in her voice reflects something the Brennans recognize: the satisfaction of self-reliance they'd inadvertently denied their own children by being too available, too generous, too willing to sacrifice. As their family departs, with tentative plans to return soon, George and Sylvia stand in the doorway of their home, arms around each other's waists. "Do you think they've really changed?" Sylvia asks. "Or is this just temporary?" "I don't know," George admits. "But we've changed, and that's what matters most." In their next session with Dr. Baker, they share the developments with their family. "It's important to understand that this isn't about punishment," she reminds them. "It's about establishing healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than dependence or obligation." "I think I was angry for a long time," George confesses. "Angry that after all we gave, so little came back to us when we needed it." "That's natural, Doctor," Baker assures him. "But moving forward isn't about keeping score. It's about creating new dynamics where everyone, including yourselves, is treated with consideration and care." Sylvia nods thoughtfully. "I realize now that by never saying no, we actually taught them that our needs didn't matter. What kind of lesson is that for parents to teach?" "A common one, Doctor," Baker says with a sad smile. "But the good news is, lessons can be unlearned. New patterns can be established. It's never too late to rewrite your story." And slowly, that's exactly what happens. The Brennans' lives expand beyond the waiting and hoping for family attention. They travel, modest trips within their means, but adventures nonetheless. They cultivate friendships that nourish rather than deplete them. They volunteer on their own terms, giving from abundance rather than scarcity. Some of their children adapt to the new boundaries better than others. Michael remains somewhat distant, occasionally testing to see if the old patterns can be re-established. Rachel makes more effort, scheduling regular video calls. David, always the most independent, stops by one afternoon with coffee and actually listens when they talk about their new activities. "You know," he says thoughtfully, "I always wondered when you two would finally start living for yourselves. It suits you." His simple acknowledgement of their growth feels like validation they didn't know they needed. On their 47th wedding anniversary, George presents Sylvia with a gift, a framed quote surrounded by photos of their new life, their community garden plot, their senior center friends, their volunteer work at the animal shelter. The quote reads, "Love without limits can empty your future. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're survival." "Did Dr. Baker say that?" Sylvia asks, tracing the words with her finger. George shakes his head. "Number I did. Just now." He smiles, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Turns out I'm wiser than I thought." Sylvia laughs, a free, unburdened sound that seems to fill their home with new life. "We both are, just a little late to the game." "Better late than never," George replies, taking her hand. "Better late than never." A year later, George sits at the kitchen table, but this time not alone, not waiting. Sylvia bustles around, preparing coffee for the friends who will arrive soon for their monthly book club. The house, once quiet with absence, now regularly fills with chosen family, with people who show up, who reciprocate care, who value the Brennans for themselves, not just for what they can provide. Their children visit sometimes, not as often as they might like, but with greater authenticity when they do. The grandchildren call occasionally, of their own accord. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Last weekend, Emma and Lily had actually shown up together, unannounced, to help with the community garden plot. Emma knelt beside George, working the soil with her hands. "Grandpa, can you teach me how to grow tomatoes like yours?" she'd asked. Not asking for money, not asking for rescue, just connection. It had been enough. The doorbell rings. George rises to answer it, no longer watching the clock, no longer counting disappointments. "Ready for visitors?" he asks Sylvia with a smile. "Always," she replies, "but on our terms now, always on our terms." Financial takeaway. When we speak of retirement planning, we often focus exclusively on numbers, savings rates, investment returns, inflation adjustments. But the Brennan story reminds us that emotional boundaries are just as crucial to financial security as sound investment strategies. Generous hearts are beautiful, but unguarded generosity can deplete your resources when you need them most. Love your family fiercely, but establish clear financial boundaries that protect your future. Remember that saying no today may actually be the most loving gift you can offer, teaching self-reliance while preserving your ability to truly help in genuine emergencies tomorrow. As financial advisors often say, secure your own oxygen mask first. It isn't selfish. It's the only way to ensure you'll remain strong enough to help others without becoming a burden yourself. Have you ever given more than you could afford, financially or emotionally? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could offer strength to someone feeling alone. And if you believe generosity should include protecting yourself, like this video, and subscribe to Goldprint. Real life, real lessons, real healing.